Nobody in Holt's Crossing knew what Everett Cobb had written in that letter. He hadn't shown it to anyone. Not his foreman, not the postmaster, not the widow Aldrich, who made it her life's work to know everybody's business before they did. He had folded the paper himself, sealed it himself, and ridden to town on a Tuesday morning when the street was still mostly empty. Whatever he'd put on those pages, he'd carried back the silence of a man who believed he had handled the matter cleanly. That was 6 weeks before the stage arrived. He had been clear in the letter. He was certain of it. He wanted a woman of plain disposition, comfortable with hard work, unbothered by quiet. He did not want beauty. He had written that, or something close to it, because beauty, in his experience, brought with it expectations he had no capacity to meet. A beautiful woman expected to be looked at. She expected rooms that weren't covered in trail dust, and suppers that were more than salt pork and day-old cornbread. She expected conversation. Everett Cobb had none of those things, and no intention of acquiring them. What he wanted was a partner, someone to keep the books, manage the household, maybe take the cooking off his hands. Someone who would not ask him why he slept on the porch in July, or why he kept the door to the back room locked. He wanted a woman who would ask few questions and accept the answers she was given. He had been told by the arrangement service that he would be matched accordingly. He was standing near the water trough when the stage slowed on the main road. But he had not planned to be there. He'd only come to town for wire and a box of nails. But something had made him linger near the livery longer than necessary. He told himself later that he hadn't been waiting. He nearly believed it. The stage door opened, and 2 men stepped out first, a drummer with a satchel and an older gentleman in a coat that had seen better decades. Then a pause. The kind of pause that pulls at the eye even when you're trying not to look. She stepped down without help. That was the first thing he noticed. Not what he expected to notice, but it lodged itself in him all the same. One hand on the doorframe, the other smoothing her skirt with the practiced calm of someone who did not require assistance and did not intend to request it. She was tall for a woman, and her hair was dark and pinned with what looked like plain wooden pins, and her dress was simple enough, gray wool, nothing extravagant. But the way she stood on that dusty road, scanning the street with steady gray eyes, she looked less like a woman arriving and more like a woman returning to a place she'd already decided was hers. Everett did not move. It was not that she was beautiful in the way people used the word carelessly, the way they said it about sunsets and prize mares. It was something quieter and more unsettling than that. She had the kind of face that made a man aware, suddenly and uncomfortably, that he had been looking at it too long. He looked away. Then, against his better judgment, looked back. She had already found him. He didn't know how. But he was not a remarkable-looking man, broad-shouldered and sun-dark and somewhere past 35, wearing a hat that needed replacing and a shirt with a tear at the left cuff he kept meaning to mend. There was nothing about him that should have drawn the eye from 50 feet away, but she was looking directly at him with an expression he couldn't read at all. And then she crossed the street toward him with a small leather bag in her hand and said simply, "Mr. Cobb." Not a question, a confirmation. "Miss," he said. He had meant to say more. He did not. Up close she was. He searched for a word that wasn't the one he kept arriving at. Composed. That was it. She was composed in the way of someone who had practiced composure until it became second nature, which told him instinctively that there had been a time when it was not. And her eyes, he noticed, moved quickly, not nervously, strategically. She glanced at the stage driver, at the street behind her, at the mouth of the alley beside the general store. all in the space of a breath. Then she looked at him again, and whatever she was looking for, she seemed to settle on a decision. "I hope the journey wasn't too long," she said. "You're the one who traveled," he said. "Yes," she agreed. "I am." He picked up her bag before she could protest, which she looked like she was about to do. She closed her mouth. They walked to the wagon. He did not ask her name. He already had it, from the letter the service had sent. Francesca. He had read it once and not thought much of it. Now, sitting beside her on the wagon bench with 2 feet of dusty air between them, he thought about it more than he wanted to. But it was not the kind of name you expected to hear in Holt's Crossing. It was the kind of name that came from somewhere else, somewhere with oil lamps instead of tallow candles, with dinner tables that had more than one fork at each setting. He flicked the reins. The horse moved. Neither of them spoke for the first mile. It was she who broke the silence, but not in the way he expected. She didn't ask about the ranch, or the house, or how many hands he kept. She asked about the land. "Is it flat all the way?" she asked, looking out at the grass that stretched to the edge of the sky. "Mostly," he said. "There's a ridge to the north. Creek runs along it." "Does it flood in spring?" He glanced at her sideways. "It has. But you've managed it." "I've managed it," he said. Another silence. Then she said, almost to herself, "Good. Yeah, that means it can be managed again." He had no response to that. He found, to his mild irritation, that he didn't need one. The wagon rolled on. The afternoon light turned amber across the grass, and she sat with her hands in her lap and looked at the land the way someone looks at something they are trying to memorize before it is taken from them. He noticed that too. He filed it away in the part of himself that noticed things he wasn't supposed to mention. The ranch house was 2 rooms and a lean-to kitchen. He had cleaned it the day before, or done what he called cleaning, which amounted to removing everything from the floor and stacking it against the walls. She walked through it without comment, touching nothing, looking at everything. The windows, the door hinges, the gap under the back door where the wind came in November, and he watched her take inventory and told himself she was simply being practical. She paused at the back room, the locked one. "Storeroom," he said, before she asked. She turned and looked at him with that unreadable expression again. "Of course," she said, and moved on. That night he ate alone on the porch while she organized the kitchen with the quiet efficiency of someone who had done it before. Many times, he suspected, and not always in houses this small. He could hear the soft sounds of it. A pot moved, a drawer closed, something set down with precision rather than convenience. Sounds that had not existed in this house for a long time. After a while, the sounds stopped, and he sat with his coffee going cold and listened to the crickets instead, and tried not to think about the way she had looked at the street when she stepped off the stage. That quick, careful scan. Not the look of a woman arriving in a new place. The look of a woman making sure she hadn't been followed. The way she stood at the window in the early morning before she thought anyone was watching, coffee in both hands, looking north toward the ridge. Not admiring the view, watching it, still and alert, in a way that had nothing to do with the morning light and everything to do with whatever was running behind those gray eyes. The way she had, after the first week, quietly moved her small leather bag from the bedroom shelf to underneath the bed. He had seen this only by accident and said nothing, but he noticed that the bag was always within reach of where she slept. Always. And the name. More than once in those early weeks, one of the hands had addressed her, cheerfully, respectfully, as Mrs. Cobb. Each time she answered without hesitation. Each time, just after, there was a half-second where something in her face reset. A small recalibration, like a person remembering which name they were using today. He told himself he was imagining it. He was not imagining it. The thing that cracked it open was a letter. He had gone to town for supplies on a Thursday. The postmaster, a thin, cheerful man named Garrett, who asked no questions, largely because he already knew the answers, had handed him his usual bundle, a feed invoice, a notice from the county, and then held up a third envelope with a look on his face that was trying hard to be nothing. "This one came addressed to the ranch," Garrett said. "Not to you personally." He paused. "Care of a Miss F. Windermere." Everett took the envelope. "Thank you, Garrett." "Came from back east," Garrett added, which was both unnecessary and exactly the kind of thing Garrett always added. The envelope was cream-colored and heavy, the kind of paper that cost money. It was sealed with wax, not a simple seal, but a crest of some kind, pressed clean and precise. Everett did not recognize it. He put it in his coat pocket and did not look at it again until he was past the edge of town, and then he only looked at the crest once more before putting it away. He gave it to her at supper without comment, and he set it beside her plate the way you'd set down a tool, plainly, without ceremony. She looked at it. The color left her face so quickly and so completely that he thought for a moment she might be ill. Then the color returned, controlled, and she picked up the envelope and put it in her apron pocket in one smooth motion and said, "Thank you," in a voice that gave away exactly nothing. They finished supper in silence. She washed the dishes. He sat on the porch. When he came back inside an hour later, the envelope was gone, and whatever was in it had been committed to memory or ashes. He couldn't tell which, and he understood, without being told, that he was not to ask. He asked anyway. Not that night. He wasn't a foolish man. But a week later, one on a Sunday afternoon, when the ranch was quiet, and she was sitting in the yard mending one of his work shirts with the focused attention she brought to every task she undertook. "Francesca," he said. She looked up. He almost never used her name, and they both knew it. "The letter," he said. "Was it trouble?" A pause. The needle went still in her hand. "Why do you ask?" "Because your face went white when you saw it." She looked at him for a long moment. He held the look, which he suspected not many people had done, and which he also suspected was exactly what she needed, someone who would not look away first. "It was from my father," she said finally. "You're not close," he said. Also not a question. "No," she said. "We are not close." She looked back down at the mending. "He wants to know where I am." "And you didn't want him to know." The needle moved again. "He found out anyway," she said quietly. "He usually does." Everett was quiet for a while. A hawk moved in slow circles above the north field. The wind pushed through the grass and flattened it and let it rise again. "Is he going to be a problem?" Everett asked. She lifted her eyes to his, and there it was again. That careful assessment, weighing something behind a door she hadn't decided yet to open. "He may send someone," she said, "to collect me." "Collect you," Everett repeated, and the flatness in his voice was not indifference. It was something colder and more deliberate than that. "I was arranged to marry a man in Philadelphia," she said. Her voice was steady, but the way a person is steady when they have rehearsed something so many times, it has gone beyond feeling. "A business arrangement between my father and a man named Hargrove. I declined. They didn't accept the decline." "My father," she said carefully, "does not accept things he hasn't decided." Silence stretched between them. Then Everett said, "How long have you been running?" She flinched, just slightly, just enough. 4 months, she said. Before I found the arrangement service. Before I found... She stopped. Before I came here. He nodded slowly. He looked at the north field again. He thought about the bag beneath her bed, always within reach. The scanning eyes on the main road the day she arrived. The name, her real name, Windermere, not Cobb, that she answered to with that half-second of recalibration. Mad, he thought about the locked room at the back of the house, and the reason he kept it locked, and the fact that he had not yet told her about that, and the uncomfortable recognition that they were, both of them, people who carried things they had not yet put down. "You should have told me," he said. Not angry, just direct. "I know," she said. "I don't like surprises on my land." "I understand. If someone comes here looking for you, I won't ask you to lie for me," she said quickly, and there was something in her voice now that was not composure, something smaller and more honest than that. "I won't ask you to do anything. If he sends someone and you want me gone, I'll go. You didn't sign on for this." He was quiet for so long that a person less composed than Francesca Windermere would have filled the silence with something, as she didna. She waited. "You fix those accounts better than I ever did," he said finally. She looked at him. "And the bread is good," he added, which was the closest Everett Cobb had ever come, in recent memory, to saying something he actually meant. She did not smile, but something in her face eased, the way a held breath eases when the body finally allows it, and she went back to the mending, and he stayed in the yard, and the hawk above the north field made one more long, slow circle before it dropped below the ridgeline and was gone. That evening, for the first time, she did not go inside immediately after supper. She sat on the porch step and looked at the sky while he smoked his pipe, and they did not talk. But the silence was different from the silences before. It had stopped being a wall and started being something else. As he didn't have a name for it yet. 2 days later, a rider appeared on the road from town. He rode slow and deliberate, the way men ride when they are being paid to arrive, and not in a hurry to leave. He wore a coat too fine for the dust he was riding through, and he had the look of a man accustomed to being listened to. Francesca was in the kitchen. She saw him through the window before Everett did. When Everett came inside to get his hat, she was standing very still in the center of the room with her hands at her sides. Not frightened, exactly, but the way a person stands when they are deciding, in the space of a breath, whether to fight or to trust someone else to fight for them. Her eyes found his. She said nothing. She did not need to. Everett put on his hat and walked out the front door. The rider's name was Pell, and he did not offer a first name, and Everett did not ask for one. He dismounted with the careful ease of a man who had learned to make everything look effortless, and he smiled the way men smile when they are carrying authority they haven't had to earn. "I'm looking for a young woman," Pell said pleasantly. "Traveling under the name Windermere, I have reason to believe she may have come through this area." Everett stood with his thumbs in his belt and looked at the man the way he looked at weather, without alarm, without hurry, simply taking accurate measure. "Who's asking?" he said. "I represent her family," Pell said. "Her father is concerned for her welfare." "That's kind of him." Pell's smile held. "You haven't seen her then?" "I didn't say that," Everett said. A pause. The Pell recalibrated slightly, the smile adjusting by a fraction, the eyes going a little sharper. "She came through town," Everett said. "Few weeks back. Stage brought her in. She moved on." He let a beat pass. "Heading west," she said. Didn't catch where exactly. Pell studied him. Everett held the man's gaze the way he held everything, without performance, without flinching, with the particular stillness of someone who had decided what he was going to do before he opened his mouth and saw no reason to revisit it. "You live alone out here?" Pell asked, glancing past him at the house. "I do," Everett said. Another pause. Then Pell nodded once, the nod of a man filing something away rather than accepting it, and said he was grateful for the help, and remounted with the same practiced ease and rode back toward town without looking back. Everett watched him until the road bent and took him out of sight. Then he stood there a moment longer in the afternoon quiet before he turned and went inside. She was still standing in the center of the kitchen. She had not moved. The light through the window had shifted in the time he'd been outside, and now it fell across her in a long amber stripe, and she looked in that moment like someone who had been waiting their whole life for a verdict and had just heard it go the other way. "He's gone," Everett said. She let out a breath, slow and controlled, but he heard it. "You lied," she said, not accusatory, almost wondering. "I told him you moved on," Everett said. "You did move on. You moved here." He set his hat on the hook by the door. "I didn't consider that a lie." She looked at him for a long moment. Something was working behind her eyes, something that was trying to sort Everett Cobb into a category she already understood, and failing, because he did not fit any of them. "He'll come back," she said. "Or my father will send someone else, someone who asks harder questions." "Maybe," Everett said. "Everett." She used his name the way he had used hers, rarely, and therefore with weight. "I need you to understand what your father is. Mine is not a man who lets go of things. He has lawyers and money and patience, and when all three of those fail him, he has men like Pell, who don't ask questions about methods." She stopped. "I don't want to bring that to your door." "It's already at my door," he said simply. Was at my door 3 minutes ago. I'm serious." "So am I." He pulled out a chair and sat down at the kitchen table. Not the porch, not the doorway, the table, which was, for Everett Cobb, a gesture she recognized, even if she couldn't have explained how. "Sit down, Francesca." She sat. "I'm going to tell you something," he said, "that I haven't told anyone in this county." He folded his hands on the table, looked at them briefly, then looked at her. "The back room, the locked one." She waited. "My wife is in there," he said. Then, reading her expression precisely, "She's gone. She died 4 years ago. Fever, in the spring. But her things are in there. Everything she had. I locked it, and I haven't opened it since because He stopped, started again. "I told myself I was preserving it. I think I was punishing myself. I'm not entirely sure there's a difference." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the wind moved through the grass. "Her name was Ruth," he said. She was plain, actually. Plain in all the ways I claim to want again. Uncomplicated and steady, and she laughed at things I didn't expect to be funny." A pause. "I thought if I got someone similar, I'd stop. I don't know. Expecting to hear her in the next room." Francesca did not say she was sorry. He was grateful for that. People had been saying they were sorry for 4 years, and it had never once made the room feel less locked. "You got me instead," she said quietly. "I got you instead," he agreed. There was no bitterness in it. If anything, there was something that was working toward its opposite, though he was not yet ready to name it. "I think," she said carefully, "that you should open that room." "I think so too," he said. "I think I've known that for a while." "Not for me," she said. For you. I know, he said. He opened it that evening. Alone, before supper, while she was outside gathering the dry laundry from the line. He stood in the doorway for a long time before he went in. It smelled of cedar and old paper and something faint he could not name, but recognized in his chest before he recognized it anywhere else. He did not stay long. He did not need to. He took nothing out and put nothing away. He simply stood in the room that had been sealed for 4 years and let it be a room again, let the air move through it, and the late light reach the corner, and the dust exist simply as dust, and not as evidence of something unfinished. When he came out, Francesca was on the porch, with the folded laundry stacked in her arms, and she looked at his face, and whatever she saw there, she received quietly, without comment. The way she received most things, with a steadiness that he had initially mistaken for distance and had slowly come to understand was its own form of care. He took the laundry from her without being asked. Their hands touched briefly in the transfer. Neither of them mentioned it. The weeks that followed were different. Not dramatically. Nothing about Everett Cobb operated dramatically, but different in the way a room is different when a window is opened. The same room, the same furniture, the same imperfect angles. Just breathing now. He started leaving the locked room open. He moved nothing, changed nothing. Quiet, but the door stayed unlatched, and after a while, the room stopped feeling like a wound and started feeling like a room. Francesca wrote a letter to her father. She did not show it to Everett, and he did not ask to see it. But she told him afterward, standing at the kitchen counter with her back to him, in a way that made it easier to say that she had told her father she was married, settled, and not coming back, that the arrangement with Hargrove had been dissolved the moment she'd boarded that stage, and that she intended it to remain dissolved. "What did you mean, married?" Everett asked. "We signed papers, but we haven't." He paused, not entirely sure how to finish the sentence with precision. "We signed papers," she said. That seemed sufficient to say. And if he sends someone to verify it? She turned around then, but looked at him with those direct gray eyes, and something in them that was not composure exactly, but had composure's architecture, calm on the surface, with more underneath than she was prepared to show in daylight. "Then we make it true," she said, quietly, clearly, without drama. He looked at her for a long time. The afternoon light was doing that thing again, where it came through the window and found her, and did not seem accidental. He had stopped telling himself it was coincidence. "Is that what you want?" he asked. Because he was the kind of man who asked plainly, or did not ask at all. "I want a life that belongs to me," she said. "I want land under my feet that no one can take back. I want to fix your accounts and argue with you about the drainage ditch and watch the light on the North Ridge in the morning." A pause. "And yes, I think I want it with you." It was the longest thing she had said to him since she arrived. He thought, briefly, that it was also the most honest thing anyone had said to him in years, maybe longer. "The drainage ditch doesn't need arguing," he said. "It absolutely does," she said. "You've run it wrong since the beginning, and the spring flooding proves it every year." He stood up from the table, crossed the kitchen in 3 steps, stopped in front of her the way a man stops when he has run out of reasons not to, when every argument he has constructed against a thing has quietly dismantled itself and left nothing standing but the thing itself. He did not say anything. She did not step back. They were married properly in the spring, at the small church in Holt's Crossing, with the reverend who asked no unnecessary questions, and 2 witnesses who were both relieved to have something worth attending. Francesca wore a dress the color of creek water, and pinned her hair with the same plain wooden pins she had arrived with, and when the Reverend asked if she took this man, she said yes, without hesitation and without performance, which was the most convincing yes Everett had ever heard in his life. Her father sent one more letter that summer. She read it at the kitchen table with her morning coffee, and then set it down and said, calmly, that he had accepted the situation. Everett asked what had changed his mind. She said she suspected it was the part where she had mentioned that she was with child. Everett went very still. Are you?" he said. "I am," she said, watching his face with the same care she watched the North Ridge, looking for weather. What she found instead was the thing she had seen briefly, only once before, on the evening he came out of the locked room. A man setting something down that he had been carrying a long time, the particular lightness of it. He pulled his chair around beside hers and sat down and took her hand in his, the hand that was still holding the letter, the hand that had held 100 things steadily since the day she arrived, the hand of a woman who had run far enough and had decided, finally, that this was where she stopped. "The drainage ditch," he said after a while. "Tell me what you'd change." She laughed. It was the first time he had heard her laugh, fully, without reservation, and it was better than he'd expected, which was saying something, because he had spent considerable private effort not expecting things about Francesca Cobb. Outside, the spring light lay flat and gold across the north field. The creek ran full along the ridge. In the house, the back room door stood open as it always did now, letting the air move through, letting the past be the past, and nothing more than that. And in the kitchen, a man who had asked for plain and received something far more complicated sat with his wife's hand in his and listened, for the first time in a long time, without any part of him bracing for it to end.